Kim Woojin pushed his glasses up his nose for the third time in 5 minutes. The thick frames kept sliding down because of the nervous sweat on his face. He clutched his student papers tightly in one hand while dragging his old wheeled suitcase behind him with the other. Nova Prime Academy stretched out before him like a small city floating in space. Through the massive viewing windows, he could see stars twinkling in the darkness beyond. Ships of all sizes came and went from the docking bays, carrying students from every corner of the known galaxy. The registration hall buzzed with activity. Woojin had never seen so many different alien species in one place. He tried not to stare at the group of Draknari warriors passing by. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, their scaled skin gleaming under the artificial lights. Their eyes glowed red, and when they spoke to each other, it sounded like rocks grinding together. Near the information booths, a cluster of beings that looked like floating jellyfish drifted through the air. These were scholars from the mist worlds, their translucent bodies pulsing with soft blue light. They communicated through color changes rather than words, creating beautiful patterns that rippled across their forms. Mechanical students clicked and whirred as they moved in perfect formation toward their designated areas. These synthoids had once been organic beings, but they had replaced most of their bodies with advanced technology. Their metal limbs moved with precise efficiency, and their glowing optical sensors swept back and forth as they analyzed everything around them. Woojin felt very small and very human among all these impressive beings. His worn brown jacket and simple black pants made him look like he had just stepped off a farming colony transport. Which he supposed was not far from the truth. He joined the long line at the registration desk. The student in front of him was some kind of plant-based creature with leaves instead of hair. It kept dropping seeds on the floor, which immediately sprouted into tiny flowers. Behind him, a 6-armed being juggled what appeared to be miniature suns while reading from 3 different data tablets at once. When Woojin finally reached the front of the line, he found himself facing a towering Alterian clerk. Her blue skin shimmered like water, and her 4 arms moved independently as she processed multiple students at once. 2 extra eyes on the sides of her head allowed her to watch the entire registration area while still focusing on individual cases. "Name and home world," she said without looking up from her screen. Her voice had a musical quality, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Kim Woojin," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He cleared his throat and tried again. "From New Sol Colony in the Outer Rim Territories." She took his identification card and scanned it with a device that hummed softly. For a moment nothing happened. Then the device beeped and she glanced at her screen with mild interest. "Graduate program in Xenobiology," she noted. "Dormitory Block C, Level 7, Room 247. She slid an access card across the counter along with a data pad containing his class schedules and campus maps. "Orientation begins tomorrow at 0800 hours, Galactic Standard Time. Next." Woojin gathered his belongings and bowed politely, a gesture that earned him several curious looks from nearby aliens. Most species had their own greeting customs, but few involved the formal bowing that humans from the Korean colonies practiced. He did not notice the amused expressions or the way some of the other students whispered to each other about the strange human customs. As he wheeled his suitcase toward the dormitory lifts, Woojin tried to take in everything around him. The academy was unlike anything he had ever imagined. The corridors were wide enough for even the largest species to move comfortably, and the walls displayed constantly changing art from hundreds of different worlds. He passed a group of students gathered around a holographic display showing the rotation of a distant planet. They were debating something in multiple languages, their universal translators working overtime to keep up with the rapid conversation. Another group had spread what looked like a 3-dimensional chess game across an entire table, with pieces that moved on their own and occasionally argued with the players. The lift arrived with a soft chime, and Woojin stepped inside along with a handful of other students. The ride to level 7 was quiet except for the occasional click from one of the mechanical beings and a soft humming sound from what appeared to be a crystalline life form. Meanwhile, in a section of the station that most students never saw, Commander Velthak sat in his security office reviewing the day's registration data. The Kralix officer had served in galactic intelligence for over 30 years, and his 4 eyes were trained to spot anomalies that others might miss. When the biometric alert flashed on his screen, all 4 of his eyes focused on it immediately. The automated systems had flagged a match in their database, cross-referencing facial recognition, DNA markers, and other biological identifiers. Velthak leaned forward, his insectoid features hardening as he read the classified file that appeared on his screen. The young human who had just registered as a simple graduate student was anything but simple. His genetic markers identified him as the son of Admiral Lee So-young, known throughout the galaxy by her military callsign, the Iron Phoenix. 20 years ago, Admiral Lee had been humanity's greatest military commander. During the Human Liberation War, when multiple alien empires had tried to subjugate the scattered human colonies, she had achieved the impossible. With smaller fleets and inferior technology, she had outmaneuvered and defeated invasion forces that should have crushed humanity completely. Her tactical innovations had changed the nature of space warfare. The Phoenix maneuvers, as they came to be known, were still studied in military academies across the galaxy. She had proven that superior numbers and advanced technology meant nothing if your enemy could think 3 moves ahead of you. Velthak's claws clicked against his desk as he processed this information. The Admiral had disappeared 15 years ago during a routine patrol mission. Most assumed she was dead, killed in some remote corner of space where no one would ever find her body. But her son had survived, apparently living quietly on one of the outer colonies. The commander immediately sent encrypted messages to his contacts in 3 different intelligence networks. Within minutes, the news was spreading through the shadows of galactic politics like wildfire. The Iron Phoenix's heir had emerged from hiding, and no one knew what that might mean for the delicate balance of power that had existed since the war's end. In his small dormitory room, Wu Jin unpacked his few belongings, completely unaware that his simple arrival at school had just changed everything. 3 weeks had passed since Wu Jin first walked through the doors of Nova Prime Academy. He had settled into what he thought was a normal student routine. Every morning he attended lectures on alien biology. In the afternoons he worked in the research labs. In the evenings he studied in his small room, trying to blend in with the thousands of other students. But staying invisible was harder than he had expected. The advanced xenobiology lab was located in the lower levels of the academy. The room was cold and sterile, filled with examination tables and strange equipment that hummed quietly. Today, Professor Zinth had brought in specimens from across the galaxy for the students to study. Wu Jin stood at his assigned table next to his lab partner, Grextar. The Skarn student was about his height but much wider, with thick armor plates covering his body. His 6 compound eyes could move independently, allowing him to examine multiple things at once. 2 large mandibles jutted out from his mouth, clicking softly when he was thinking. On their table lay the preserved body of a Skarn warrior. Professor Zinth had explained that this specimen had been donated by the Skarn military for educational purposes. The warrior had died in an accident during training exercises, and his family had agreed to let students learn from his remains. Wu Jin picked up a small metal probe and began examining the warrior's head. He had studied Skarn anatomy in his textbooks, but seeing it in person was different. The intricate network of nerves and blood vessels was far more complex than any diagram could show. "Fascinating," he murmured, moving the probe to point at a cluster of nerves behind the warrior's left eye. "The neural cluster here controls their combat reflexes. If you could sever the connections right here and here," he traced a precise path with his probe, "it would disable their fighting abilities within 2.3 seconds without causing death." Grextar had been taking notes on his data pad, but he stopped writing. All 6 of his eyes turned to focus on Wu Jin. The clicking of his mandibles grew louder and faster. "That is very specific knowledge," Grextar said slowly. His voice had a buzzing quality that made it sound like he was speaking through water. "How would a biology student know exact combat applications? And why would you know the precise timing?" Wu Jin felt his face grow hot. He had not meant to reveal so much detail. The information had just flowed out of him naturally, the way it always did when he looked at military targets. He tried to think of a reasonable explanation. "I read a lot of military journals in my free time," he said, attempting to sound casual. "Academic interest only. You know how it is. Sometimes the medical and military fields overlap." Grextar's mandibles continued clicking. "I am Skarn. I know our anatomy better than most doctors. What you described is not in any medical textbook. That knowledge comes only from military intelligence reports. Very classified military intelligence reports." Before Wu Jin could respond, an alarm began blaring throughout the academy. Red lights flashed in the corridors and an automated voice announced, "Emergency alert. All students report to designated safe areas immediately. This is not a drill." Professor Zinth, who had been helping other students at the far end of the lab, rushed toward the exit. "Everyone follow emergency protocols," she called out. "Move quickly but do not panic." Most of the students began gathering their belongings and heading for the doors. But Wu Jin found himself walking toward the large viewing window that showed the space around the academy. In the distance, he could see explosions lighting up the darkness. A civilian transport ship was under attack. 3 smaller vessels with jagged black hulls were firing on the larger ship with energy weapons. The transport's shields were failing, and pieces of debris were already floating away from its damaged sections. "Void pirates," someone behind him whispered. "They attack civilian ships for cargo and prisoners." Wu Jin watched the battle with growing concern. The transport was trying to reach the academy, probably hoping that the station's defenses would protect it. But the pirates were faster and more maneuverable. They would destroy the civilian ship before it could reach safety. Without thinking, Wu Jin turned away from the window and began walking quickly toward the lab's communication panel. Other students were still filing out of the room, but he ignored them. His fingers moved across the control interface with practiced ease. "Station security, this is Lab 7 in the biology section," he said into the communicator. "The civilian transport under attack is a modified cargo hauler, probably carrying about 300 passengers. The pirates are using standard hit-and-run tactics." A voice crackled back through the speaker. "Who is this? Students should evacuate immediately." "Listen to me," Wu Jin said, his voice taking on a tone of authority that surprised even him. "The transport's engines are damaged but not destroyed. If you can get a tractor beam on them from Vector 77 Mark IV, you can pull them into the station's defensive perimeter before the pirates can finish them off." "How do you know about our tractor beam positions?" the security officer asked suspiciously. Wu Jin realized he was revealing too much again, but lives were at stake. "The pirates are using Keth-class raiders. Their shields are strong in front but weak on the underside. If your defense platforms target their bellies instead of their prows, you can disable them quickly." There was silence for a moment. Then, "Stand by." Through the viewing window, Wu Jin watched as the Academy's tractor beams reached out toward the damaged transport. The powerful energy fields grabbed hold of the civilian ship and began pulling it toward safety. At the same time, the station's weapon platforms adjusted their aim and began firing at the undersides of the pirate ships. The battle was over in minutes. 2 of the pirate ships exploded, and the third fled into hyperspace. The civilian transport, badly damaged but intact, was pulled into one of the Academy's docking bays. Wu Jin felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Grextar standing behind him, all 6 eyes focused intently on his face. "Biology students do not know about tractor beam positions," the Skarn said quietly. "Biology students do not recognize specific classes of pirate ships. And biology students definitely do not coordinate military operations with station security." Before Wu Jin could answer, Professor Zinth returned to the lab. "Excellent work, whoever provided that tactical information to security," she announced. "You saved 300 lives today." That night, Wu Jin returned to his dormitory room feeling exhausted and worried. He had tried so hard to blend in, but his training kept showing through. Every time he looked at a problem, he saw it through the eyes of a military strategist rather than a simple student. As he prepared for bed, something caught his eye. A small piece of dust was falling from the ceiling near his desk. He looked up and saw a tiny hole in the metal plating above his head. The hole was perfectly round and very small, exactly the right size for a surveillance device. Wu Jin grabbed a chair and climbed up to examine the ceiling more closely. Hidden behind loose panels, he found 3 micro-surveillance drones. Each one was no larger than his fingernail, equipped with cameras and listening devices. They had been watching and recording everything he did in his room. He carefully removed the drones and set them on his desk. His hands were shaking slightly as the full reality of his situation became clear. Someone knew who he really was. His cover as a simple graduate student was completely blown. The galaxy's intelligence networks had found Admiral Lee So-young's son. The message arrived on Wu Jin's personal communicator at exactly 0600 hours the next morning. It was short and direct. "Report to Station Commander's office immediately. Come alone." Wu Jin had barely slept after finding the surveillance devices in his room. He had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, wondering who was watching him and what they wanted. Now he had his answer. The commander's office was located in the highest level of the academy, in a section that most students never saw. Wu Jin had to pass through 3 security checkpoints just to reach the outer waiting area. Each checkpoint scanned him with different types of sensors, checking everything from his identity to his body temperature. The final door opened with a soft hiss, and Wu Jin stepped into an office that was larger than his entire dormitory room. The walls were made of transparent aluminum, offering a stunning view of the stars and the busy space traffic around the academy. Ships of all sizes moved in carefully controlled patterns, like a complex dance choreographed by traffic control computers. Behind a massive desk sat Station Commander Zexera. She was a Quellian, one of the most ancient species in the galaxy. Her people had been exploring space when humans were still learning to make fire. She had 4 arms, each ending in delicate hands with 6 fingers. Her skin was a pale green color, and her large black eyes seemed to see everything at once. "Sit down, Kim Woojin," she said, gesturing to a chair in front of her desk. Her voice had a melodic quality, but there was steel underneath the politeness. "Or should I call you by your real name?" Woojin's heart began beating faster. "I don't understand what you mean, Commander." Zexera touched a control on her desk and the office lights dimmed. Suddenly, the space above her desk filled with holographic images. Battle scenes from 20 years ago played out in 3 dimensions, showing massive fleets of ships fighting in the darkness of space. "Let me tell you a story," Zexera said, using 2 of her hands to manipulate the holographic controls while the other 2 remained folded in her lap. 20 years ago, the major powers of this galaxy decided that humanity had grown too strong too quickly. The Hegemony Council voted to divide the human colonies among the established empires. The holographic display showed maps of human space, with different colored zones marking which alien empire would control which worlds. Woojin recognized some of the colony names. These were places where millions of humans lived and worked, raising families and building lives. The invasion fleets were massive, Zexera continued. The Draknari Empire sent 200 warships. The Altarian Republic deployed their entire battle fleet. Even the machine worlds of the Synthoid Collective joined the attack. Humanity had perhaps 50 ships total, scattered across dozens of worlds. New holographic images appeared, showing the overwhelming size difference between the invasion forces and the small human defense fleets. It looked impossible. No reasonable military commander would have attempted to fight such odds. But humanity had something the other empires did not expect, Zexera said. They had Admiral Li So-young. The hologram shifted to show a woman in a military uniform standing on the bridge of a warship. Even in the ghostly blue light of the projection, Woojin could see the resemblance. She had his eyes and the same stubborn set to her jaw that he saw in mirrors. "Your mother was not just a fleet commander," Zexera said. "She was a genius. In 6 months of fighting, she destroyed or disabled over 400 enemy ships while losing only 12 of her own. She turned the entire invasion into a disaster for the attackers." Woojin watched in fascination as the holographic battles played out. His mother's ships moved in patterns that seemed almost like a dance. They appeared where enemies did not expect them, struck at weak points that should have been impossible to identify, and vanished before return fire could reach them. "How?" he asked quietly. "The Phoenix Doctrine," Zexera replied. "Your mother discovered that large fleets have inherent weaknesses. They depend on communication networks that can be disrupted. They follow predictable movement patterns. Most importantly, they assume their enemies will fight conventionally." The holographic display showed a detailed analysis of one of his mother's victories. A force of 12 human ships had somehow defeated 60 alien vessels by attacking their command structure first, then using the confusion to destroy supply ships and communication relays. "But the war was only the beginning," Zexera said. The images changed to show star charts marked with hundreds of locations. "After the fighting ended, your mother spent 10 years preparing for the next conflict. She knew it was coming." Woojin leaned forward in his chair. "What kind of preparations?" Zexera used all 4 of her hands to manipulate the controls, and the holographic display exploded into complexity. Supply depot locations, hidden bases, communication networks, and personnel files filled the air above the desk. 47 hidden supply caches scattered across known space, she said. Each one contains enough weapons and equipment to outfit a small fleet. 17 different contingency plans for various invasion scenarios. A network of sleeper agents placed in key positions throughout multiple governments. Sleeper agents? Woojin's voice cracked slightly. People who live normal lives but are trained to activate when needed. Scientists, merchants, even some government officials. Your mother placed them everywhere over the course of years. Most of them don't even know they're part of her network until they receive the proper activation codes. The holographic display shifted again, showing current political maps of the galaxy. Different empires were highlighted in various colors, with threat assessments and military strength evaluations floating next to each one. "And now all of this is yours," Zexera said quietly. "Your genetic markers match the security protocols your mother established. Her hidden bases will recognize you. Her agents will follow your orders. Her weapons caches will open for you. Wu Jin felt dizzy. I'm just a student. I study alien biology. I don't know anything about military strategy or running spy networks. Zexera's laugh was not pleasant. Your performance yesterday suggests otherwise. You identified pirate ship classifications instantly. You knew the exact positions of our defensive systems. You coordinated a military response that saved 300 lives. Those are not the actions of a simple student. She touched another control and new images appeared. These showed recent intelligence reports from multiple agencies. Half the galaxy's governments are terrified that you will unite the human colonies and launch a campaign of conquest, she said. Several alien empires have already voted to eliminate you before you can claim your inheritance. Others are sending diplomatic envoys, hoping to recruit you as an ally. And what do you want? Wu Jin asked. Zexera studied him with her large black eyes. I want to know what you intend to do. Your mother's legacy is a loaded weapon pointed at the heart of galactic civilization. You can choose to fire it or you can choose to put it away. But you cannot choose to ignore it. She gestured and the holographic displays vanished. The office returned to normal lighting, but somehow everything felt different now. Take time to think, she said. But not too much time. Word is spreading that Admiral Li's son has been found. Soon, everyone will want to know what Kim Wu Jin plans to do with the most dangerous inheritance in the galaxy. Wu Jin stood up slowly, his legs feeling unsteady. What happened to her? My mother? She disappeared 15 years ago during a routine patrol, Zexera replied. Most people assume she died. But her ship was never found and no body was ever recovered. As Wu Jin walked toward the door, Zexera called after him. One more thing. Your mother left a personal message for you. It's stored in the primary cache on Kepler Station. When you're ready to claim your inheritance, that's where you'll need to go. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Wu Jin alone in the corridor with the weight of an entire galaxy's expectations pressing down on his shoulders. The attack came without warning at 0347 hours, Galactic Standard Time. Wu Jin was in his dormitory room, trying to sleep after another restless night thinking about his conversation with Commander Zexera. The first explosion shook the entire station, throwing him from his bed onto the metal floor. Emergency alarms began screaming throughout Nova Prime Academy. Red warning lights flashed in every corridor, and the automated voice system repeated the same message over and over, hull breach detected. All personnel report to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Wu Jin grabbed his clothes and ran toward his window. Outside in space he could see things that made no sense. Ships were appearing out of nowhere, materializing from empty space like ghosts becoming solid. These were not normal spacecraft. They looked alive, with hulls that pulsed like beating hearts and weapons that grew from their bodies like claws. The Devourers had found Nova Prime Academy. Other students were running through the corridors, screaming in dozens of different languages. The Draknari warriors roared their battle cries, but even they looked frightened. The floating jellyfish beings from the mist worlds had turned a dark purple color, which Wu Jin knew meant they were terrified. The station's defensive shields flickered and sparked as the Devourer ships fired their bioweapons. Each impact sent waves of energy through the Academy structure. Lights went out in sections of the station. The artificial gravity fluctuated, making everyone stumble as their weight changed from moment to moment. Wu Jin pushed through the panicking crowds toward the main command center. He had studied the station's layout during his first week, memorizing every corridor and emergency route. Now that knowledge served him well as he navigated through the chaos. The command center was in complete disorder when he arrived. Station personnel ran back and forth between control panels, shouting orders that no one seemed to follow. Commander Zexera stood in the center of the room, using all four of her arms to operate different systems at once. Shields are failing, someone called out. Hull breaches on levels 5 through 8. Evacuation pods are launching, but the Devourers are destroying them as fast as they leave the station, another voice reported. Communication with the fleet is cut off. We're on our own. Wu Jin watched the main display screen, which showed the battle outside. The Devourer ships moved like living creatures, flowing around the station's weapons fire and striking at weak points with surgical precision. Their biomechanical hulls absorbed most of the damage from the Academy's defensive systems. Something clicked in Wu Jin's mind. The same feeling he had experienced during the pirate attack, but stronger now. He could see the pattern of the enemy's movements. He could identify their weaknesses. Most importantly, he knew what needed to be done. Commander Zexera, he said, his voice cutting through the noise and confusion. She turned toward him, her large black eyes wide with stress. "Student Kim, you should not be here. Report to the nearest emergency shelter." "No," Wu Jin said firmly. He pulled off his glasses and let them fall to the floor. When he straightened his shoulders, he seemed taller somehow, more commanding. "Activate Protocol Phoenix 7. The room went quiet. Every person in the command center turned to stare at him. Commander Zexera's forearms stopped moving. "That protocol does not exist," she said slowly. "Check your classified files," Wu Jin replied. "Authorization code, Iron Phoenix 77 Alpha." Zexera moved to a secure terminal and entered the code. Her expression changed as hidden files appeared on her screen. "Impossible. These protocols were installed 15 years ago, but they were never activated." "My mother planned for this," Wu Jin said. "Activate the protocol now." Throughout the station, hidden panels began opening. Walls that had looked solid for years slid apart to reveal military equipment that had been cached in secret compartments. Advanced weapons, armor, and communication gear emerged from hiding places that most people never knew existed. In the maintenance sections, ordinary workers suddenly stopped their routine tasks. These were the sleeper agents that Admiral Lee had placed years ago. They had lived normal lives, repairing pipes and cleaning corridors, waiting for the day when they would be needed. Now they moved with military precision, grabbing weapons and taking up defensive positions. "Sir," one of them said, approaching Wu Jin with a crisp salute. "Maintenance Chief Park Jin-ho reporting for duty. We have 16 agents ready for deployment." Wu Jin nodded. "Seal all non-essential sections. Reroute power from the residential areas to the defensive systems. And get me a direct link to the particle accelerator lab." The command center transformed around him. What had been chaos minutes before became organized efficiency. Station personnel who had been running around in panic now followed his orders without question. "The Devourers are biological creatures," Wu Jin explained as he worked. "They depend on their hive mind to coordinate attacks. If we can disrupt their neural connections, they will become confused and vulnerable." He turned to the weapons officer. "Recalibrate the defensive arrays to target their communication organs. They're located in the bulbous sections near the rear of each ship." "How do you know that?" the officer asked. "Because my mother fought them before," Wu Jin replied. "These are not the first Devourers to attack human space. She developed counter-tactics 20 years ago. The battle outside began to change. Instead of firing randomly at the enemy ships, the station's weapons now targeted specific areas with deadly accuracy. The Devourers' coordinated attack patterns began to break down as their ships lost contact with each other. Wu Jin used the station's artificial gravity generators to create zones of crushing force that trapped Devourer vessels. He turned the particle accelerators in the research labs into massive weapons, firing streams of energy that could cut through biomechanical hulls. Most impressively, he managed to unite the various alien species on the station into effective fighting units. Draknari warriors worked alongside synthoid technicians. The floating beings from the mist worlds used their natural telepathy to coordinate communications between different species. The battle raged for 18 hours. Wave after wave of Devourer ships attacked the station, but each assault was weaker than the last. Wu Jin's tactics were working. By disrupting their hive mind connections, he had turned the Devourers from a coordinated swarm into individual creatures that could be defeated one by one. During the final hours of the fight, something unexpected happened. The largest Devourer ship, which had been hanging back from the main battle, suddenly accelerated toward the station. It was clearly attempting a suicide run, planning to destroy Nova Prime Academy by ramming into it at full speed. "All weapons target that ship," Wu Jin ordered. "Sir, it's too close. Our weapons can't penetrate its armor at this range," the weapons officer reported. Wu Jin studied the tactical display for a moment, then smiled grimly. "Emergency power to the main shield generators. Maximum strength, focused on grid 7-7. Sir, that will drain our entire power reserve. If this doesn't work, we'll be defenseless." "It will work," Wu Jin said confidently. The station's shields formed a concentrated barrier directly in front of the approaching Devourer ship. When the creature struck the shields at full speed, the impact created a massive explosion that lit up space for thousands of kilometers. The Devourer ship was completely destroyed, and the shockwaves scattered the remaining enemy vessels. Within minutes, the surviving Devourers retreated into hyperspace, leaving behind only debris and the smoking wreckage of their destroyed ships. In the command center, everyone stared at Wu Jin with a mixture of awe and fear. The nervous graduate student was gone, replaced by a military commander who had just achieved an impossible victory. Commander Zexera approached him slowly. "Admiral Lee would be proud," she said quietly. Wu Jin looked around the command center, seeing the faces of people from dozens of different species, all of whom had followed his orders without question during the battle. "Send a message to all galactic governments," he said. "Tell them that Kim Woo-jin has claimed his inheritance." The news traveled faster than the fastest starships. Within 3 days of the battle at Nova Prime Academy, every major government in the galaxy knew what had happened. A human student had single-handedly organized the defense of the station against a devourer attack. More importantly, that student was the son of Admiral Lee So-young, and he had access to all of her hidden resources. Emergency sessions were called in the Hegemony Council, the Draknari War Cabinet, and the Altarian Senate. Military leaders who had spent decades studying Admiral Lee's tactics now had to consider what her son might do with the same knowledge and abilities. Some governments immediately began mobilizing their fleets, preparing for what they believed would be humanity's revenge for the invasion 20 years ago. Others sent diplomatic messages, hoping to negotiate before any fighting began. A few even offered alliance, recognizing that the galaxy faced threats that required Admiral Lee's strategic genius. Wu Jin received hundreds of communications in the weeks following the battle. Alien ambassadors requested meetings. Military commanders offered him positions in their forces. Some messages contained threats, while others contained promises of wealth and power if he would join their causes. But the most important message came from the Galactic Council itself. The ancient governing body that had tried to divide humanity 2 decades ago now formally requested his presence at their headquarters on Nexus Prime. They wanted to hear what Admiral Lee's heir intended to do with his inheritance. The journey to Nexus Prime took 5 days aboard a diplomatic transport. Wu Jin spent most of the trip in his cabin, studying files that Commander Zexera had given him. These contained his mother's complete plans for humanity's future, including something called Project Rising Phoenix. The project was massive in scope. It outlined how to unite all human colonies under a single government, how to build a fleet that could challenge any alien empire, and how to establish humanity as the dominant power in the galaxy. Every detail had been planned, from supply lines to recruitment strategies to the precise timing of military campaigns. Reading through the plans, Wu Jin began to understand why so many alien governments were afraid. His mother had not just prepared for defense. She had created a blueprint for conquest that could turn humanity from a collection of scattered colonies into a galactic empire. Nexus Prime was the oldest space station in known civilization. It had been built thousands of years ago by the first species to achieve interstellar travel, and every major galactic decision had been made within its ancient halls. The station was enormous, large enough to house representatives from every known species along with their staffs and security forces. When Wu Jin's transport docked, he was met by a full honor guard. Soldiers from a dozen different species stood at attention as he walked through the airlock. Their weapons were ceremonial, but the message was clear. This was not just a diplomatic meeting. This was a moment that would shape galactic history. The Grand Assembly Chamber was a vast spherical room with seating arranged in concentric circles. Representatives from over 60 species filled the seats, their various forms creating a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes. At the center of the chamber stood a single podium, where speakers could address the entire assembly. Wu Jin walked slowly toward the podium, aware that thousands of eyes were watching his every step. Some of the representatives whispered to their aides. Others sat in complete silence, waiting to see what humanity's heir would say. When he reached the podium, Wu Jin activated the holographic projectors built into the platform. Above his head, a three-dimensional display showed detailed star maps of human space, with every colony and outpost clearly marked. "Honored representatives," he began, his voice amplified to reach every corner of the chamber. "I am Kim Wu Jin, son of Admiral Lee So-young. You have asked me here to explain my intentions regarding my mother's legacy." The display above him shifted to show Admiral Lee's military campaigns from 20 years ago. Battle scenes played out in miniature, showing how small human fleets had defeated much larger alien forces through superior tactics and strategy. "My mother was a brilliant military commander," Wu Jin continued. "She saved humanity from conquest and slavery. But she also believed that conflict with other species was inevitable. She spent years preparing for the next war." New images appeared in the holographic display. These showed Project Rising Phoenix in all its complexity. Fleet deployment patterns, resource allocation charts, and timeline projections filled the air above the assembly. "This is her master plan," Wu Jin said. A complete strategy for turning humanity into a galactic superpower. She identified the weaknesses of every major empire. She planned invasion routes to your most important worlds. She even calculated how long it would take to defeat each of your governments. Murmurs of fear and anger rippled through the assembly. Several representatives reached for communication devices, probably to warn their governments. Others stood up as if preparing to leave the chamber immediately. But Wu Jin raised his hand for silence, and surprisingly the chamber quieted. My mother prepared for war because she believed it was coming whether humanity wanted it or not, he said. But I have lived among you. I have studied with your children. I have fought beside your soldiers against a common enemy. The holographic display changed again. This time, instead of military plans, it showed images from Nova Prime Academy. Alien and human students working together in laboratories. Mixed crews fighting side by side against the Devourers. Representatives from different species cooperating during the emergency. I have learned something my mother never had the chance to discover, Wu Jin said. The greatest strength is not the ability to defeat your enemies. It is the ability to turn your enemies into allies. He gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show something completely new. It was still based on his mother's strategic framework, but instead of military campaigns, it showed diplomatic initiatives. Instead of conquest, it outlined cooperation. I call this the Phoenix Accords, Wu Jin announced. A new treaty system that uses military thinking to build peace instead of war. We will share technology and resources. We will coordinate defense against common threats. We will create a galaxy where species compete through achievement rather than conquest. The assembly chamber was completely silent now. Every representative stared at the holographic display, studying the details of his proposal. I am Admiral Li So-young's heir, Wu Jin said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. I have inherited her strategic genius and her hidden resources. But I will not be her successor. I choose to be something the galaxy has never seen before. A human who uses the art of war to prevent wars from happening. The first species to respond was unexpected. The Kralix representative, whose people were known for their warrior culture, stood up from his seat. The Kralix Empire will consider these accords, he announced. Any human who can defeat the Devourers has earned the right to speak of peace. One by one, other representatives began to stand. Not all of them, but enough to show that Wu Jin's words had been heard and understood. 6 months later, Nova Prime Academy hosted the largest diplomatic gathering in galactic history. Representatives from 43 different species came to the station where a human student had proven that cooperation could triumph over conquest. The signing ceremony took place in the same command center where Wu Jin had coordinated the defense against the Devourers. Commander Zexera, now serving as the first director of interspecies cooperation, watched as document after document was signed and sealed. As the last signature was added to the Phoenix Accords, Wu Jin looked out through the command center's viewing windows at the space around the academy. Ships from dozens of worlds floated in formation, their crews working together to build something that had never existed before. A galaxy united not by conquest but by choice. The student who had arrived at Nova Prime Academy with nothing but research notes and nervous dreams had become something none of them had expected. Not a warlord like his mother, but a peacemaker who proved that sometimes the greatest victory is choosing not to fight at all.